Welcome to R&R Living Life. In this episode, Rick and I make our way north to Urandangi, through to Mount Isa where we spend the afternoon doing odd jobs, before making our way to Mary Kathleen where we camped overnight. The next day we continued on to Cloncurry and Quamby. Our one night at Tobermorey had turned into two, as rain at Glenormiston was sufficient to cut the Plenty Highway to Boulia. We were quite happy to spend an extra day or two waiting for the road to dry out, not like some other travellers who were in a hurry to leave. For morning tea we shouted ourselves to a home-cooked green lamington. Though the treat was delicious, it was not good for the blood sugar reading later that day. That afternoon Rick and I went for a walk around the huge levee bank that is an addition to when we were last here. Our first introduction to Tobermorey was when friends of ours called during our very first and day one of on-air lessons with the Mount Isa School of Distance Education to be rescued from the roof of the homestead. Back then the radio was used quite frequently, not only in cases of medical emergency with the flying doctor, but using a different frequency for communication with workers around the station, in stock camps or on the outstation, as well as the usual daily on-air lessons. After checking with the owners about road conditions, especially as we didn't want to join those stuck on the Plenty, Rick and I spent the extra day at Tobermorey enjoying some downtime. The following morning, after checking in with Kay, we found they were sending 6 decks of weaners out through Urandangi, so Rick and I and another couple took the opportunity to follow the road train. The road was in pretty good condition, with a few wet spots, but all in all was your typical outback gravel road. We were amazed by the amount of feed across the stations we travelled through, and the cattle were in prime condition, even to the point of wanting to play as we drove past. The Plenty to Boulia turned out to be closed for a week, and the afternoon we arrived in the Isa, the Urandangi road was also closed. As we travelled along the Queensland Northern Territory border to Urandangi, we drove through Manners Creek, a breeding and finishing property, with the country a balance of open and semi-open gidgee, with a good mix of native pasture including Mitchell and Flinders grasses, buffel and spinifex, plus a wide range of seasonal herbage. We crossed flood-out country from Manners Creek, from which the property takes its name, and passed through country that is watered by bores pumped from a combination of solar and diesel motors to troughs and tanks. Just before Urandangi we crossed the Georgina River, with its headwaters rising in the Barkly Tableland north of Camberwell in Queensland, and in the extreme east of the Northern Territory beyond Tennant Creek, and to the south draining the northern slopes of the McDonnell Ranges. The Georgina is formed from several smaller streams over a wide area of northwestern Queensland and the eastern Northern Territory. As the Georgina flows south into the Channel Country, it reaches a confluence with Eyre Creek that in times of peak flow empties into the Warburton River and ultimately into Lake Eyre. Urandangi, located on the banks of the Georgina, about 190 kilometres from Mount Isa, was founded in 1885 with the humble beginnings of a general store. The Dangi is in Channel Country, with watercourses in the area part of the Lake Eyre drainage basin, but most will dry up before reaching Lake Eyre. Urandangi was the ideal place for drovers to stop, as there was usually water in the Georgina, and if not, there was always the stock water troughs, becoming a drover's rest stop between Camberwell and Dejara that quickly expanded into a township where mail and supplies could be accessed. It was not an uncommon sight to see at least 3 mobs of drovers with up to 2,000 head of cattle on the stock route around Urandangi. Over the years, in its heyday, the tiny town grew, and by the 1920s there were 2 stores, 3 hotels, a post office, police station, several private residences, and also a dance hall, which was a welcome sight for many a drover. In March 2023, Urandangi was inundated with over 7 metres of flood water, the biggest flooding event to impact the region since 2009, resulting in the evacuation of the entire town. 3 months later, it was again flooded. Due to the extent of the damage, sadly, there is very little left of the town that is habitable, with the Urandangi Hotel severely damaged and in ruins, and set for demolition by the Boulia Council, following the floods that swamped the almost 140-year-old building. Months later, there were still signs of where the water had risen to. Many years ago, we had taken the boys across to a horse sports there, and I remember it as a very hot and dusty day, with very little grass on the vast red plains or lush trees along the channels to stop some of the wind. Certainly very different from all the grass we were seeing around the sports ground and through the channels. Other stations we passed through on leaving Urandangi are Carandotta, part of the Headingley Station lease, with its mix of floodplains and pebbly downs country covered in Mitchell and Flinders grasses, and lightly timbered with bloodwood, gidgee and coolabah trees along watercourses, and on through Ardmore and Oban, another fattening block. As a matter of interest, from when we were through the area, another flood had inundated Urandangi in November 2024, making it 3 floods in 18 months. Rick and I were enjoying travelling through this area of northwestern Queensland, not only the wide open downs country and tree-lined watercourses, but it brought back all the good times and great friends we had had in the area. Though we often travelled along the lower road between Urandangi and Dajara, the country was very similar, and it was nothing for us to drive 4 hours one way just to attend an activity day that also moved on to land care and isolated children's parents' meetings in the afternoon, then a barbecue and yarns around the fire late into the night. We enjoyed seeing the cattle in good condition, and the amount of feed was staggering. Though I have later found out that there was a severe bushfire in September-October 2024 that went through the region, with fires burning in the northwest for nearly 2 months, with crews and landholders exhausted from continually working to contain the blaze, even with air support to assist. Temperatures in the area were said to have soared to above 40 degrees, making work difficult for all involved. As much as landowners look forward to good conditions brought on by great rain, there is always the flip side with the possibility of bushfires. One blaze that began deep in the northwest had traversed more than 100,000 hectares, the same size as a small European country. Blazes can start by electrical storms with lightning strikes. Pastoralists and those living in rural and often isolated areas take the good with the bad. There was always friendly camaraderie between families regardless of what company they worked for or family-owned properties. It was all one big community helping each other when necessary. From Urandangi we continued on until about 90 kilometres south of Mount Isa, where we joined the Diamantina Developmental Road that joins Dajara to Mount Isa, and I can honestly say that it is in pretty poor condition, being a narrow bitumen lane with broken edges and in places a sharp drop-off. I cannot remember it being this bad when we lived out here 30 years ago, but with the volume of trucks, both mining and pastoral, using the road, it is no wonder it has disintegrated. In its heyday, the small outback settlement of Dajara was the biggest cattle trucking centre in the world, trucking out more cattle than Texas in America. Drovers would bring cattle from as far away as Western Australia to put them on the train at Dajara. Back then, Dajara was the end of the line from Queensland's Northern Outback Railway System and the closest railhead to the Northern Territory. But those days have gone, and the last train pulled out of Dajara in 1988. So now all those cattle that were once railed out of Dajara make their way through this area in road trains. Hence, the road is an important route for the movement of cattle and freight, mining and outback tourism, and I was thankful that we did not meet a lot of traffic, and for those vehicles we pulled up onto the side of the road. On arriving in Mount Isa, nestled among the ochre-red Selwyn Ranges on the banks of the Leichhardt River, We made our way to Bunnings to pick up a few things, and then did some other odd jobs around town. Mount Isa is rich in history and culture, though some not of a happy nature. It began as a mining town following the discovery of substantial deposits of lead in 1923, and is now one of the world's top 10 producers of copper, silver, lead and zinc. Apart from mining, the Gulf region's major industry is beef cattle grazing, with the beef roads, which service the northern Gulf properties, converging on Mount Isa, which is also an important retail service centre for the surrounding pastoral towns and properties. The Kalkadoon people first came into contact with advancing European pastoralists and miners in the mid-1860s, following the Burke and Wills expedition to the Cape York Peninsula in 1861. As settlers and prospectors pressed further into their lands, the Kalkadoon set out on one of Australia's most successful guerrilla wars, now known as the Kalkadoon Wars, which took place from about 1871 to 1884. Such a violent time in our history, remembered by a plaque at Black Mountain. We did not stay long in the Isa, as it had been our service centre for over 10 years, and the boys had completed most or some of their primary education through the School of the Air based in the Isa, with twice yearly visits for school activities and mini-schools. Mount Isa is near the Selwyn Ranges, a rugged mountain range that stretches to Cloncurry, covered in low eucalypt woodlands and spinifex grasslands. The area is heavily mineralised, containing copper, gold, lead and zinc, and is important for mining. After refuelling, we made our way along the Barkly Highway through the ranges to Mary Kathleen. In 1954, a major deposit of uranium ore was discovered here near the Chlorella River. In the mid to late 1900s, Mary Kathleen Township was home to thousands of residents. Most worked on Australia's largest known uranium deposit at Mary Kathleen Mine. In its heyday, the township had a population of 1,000 people and was situated 6 kilometres from the working mine. The township had all the essentials that a population of that size needed: a post office, school, cinema, banks, hospital, supermarkets, swimming pool, sports ground, orchards, and more. The uranium in the mine was exhausted in 1981, and it was subsequently closed. With the mine long closed, the structures of the township were sold by public auction and have all been removed. But Mary Kathleen's secrets are not hard to uncover. We found the old town foundations, an outline of the pool and the concrete slabs where homes once stood. What was left of the township now provides a large area for campers, so there was plenty of space to park away from others. After a very restful night, I spent the early morning not only watching the sunrise but watching the spinifex pigeons scavenging around the cement blocks we had parked on. We did have some four-legged visitors, cattle, during the night, but they were not an issue. After breakfast, we made our way to Cloncurry, nestled on the banks of the Cloncurry River. Just to confuse visitors, the Flinders Highway enters from the east from Townsville, and the Barkly Highway exits to the west, while the Landsborough Highway enters from the south-east, and the Burke Developmental Road exits to the north, as well as the Cloncurry-Dejara Road exiting to the south from the Barkly Highway just west of the town. Cloncurry was effectively created by one man, Ernest Hendry. Although he came to the district planning to find good grazing land, he found copper, establishing the Great Australian Mine, and built and operated a hotel and a general store. As a result, the town became the most important transportation centre in Western Queensland. Cloncurry was the destination for the first regular Qantas flight, and during World War II the airport was used by the US Air Force as a vital link with Europe. Cattle grazing is one of the major industries in the region, and a large sale yard is located in the town, the second largest cattle handling facility in Queensland, with Cloncurry consistently recording over 200,000 head of cattle moving through the facility each year. Cloncurry sits at the junction of 5 major freight routes and the Townsville to Mount Isa railway line, with the railway from Townsville arriving in 1907, being officially opened in 1908, making the town a vital transportation hub for the pastoral interests which lay to the west and the north. Recently, in 2024, pastoralists across northern Australia were able to increase cattle processing numbers thanks to newly completed works to improve cattle loading capabilities at rail yards at Cloncurry, Urandangi and Maxwellton on the Mount Isa rail line. Remote, rugged and spectacular, but unforgiving in its landscape, Cloncurry is famous for being an historic outback mining town, but also the birthplace of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, or RFDS. Conceived and launched by the Reverend John Flynn in the 1920s, this flying medical service is just as integral to the people of the outback today as it ever was. The Cloncurry Stockman's Challenge and Camp Draft and Cloncurry Show were events that we regularly visited during our time out west. Roughly 50 kilometres north of Cloncurry on the Burke Developmental Road, nestled between Cloncurry and Normanton, Quamby used to be a bustling railway village, catering to the needs of the cattle and mining sector. After a period of abandonment, the historic Quamby pub, established in 1860, has been revived and is now operational, though with a for sale sign out the front. The Quamby Hotel was originally built as a customs house in the 1860s and converted to a hotel somewhere around 1921. It was also used as a staging post for Cobb & Co. stagecoaches, who required fresh teams of horses every 10 to 30 miles. In the 1930s, the town is reputed to have had 40 homes, but the demise of the railway saw most of the existing buildings relocated, as was common with the stump timber-framed houses of North Queensland. Quamby Hotel was the watering hole for many jackaroos and stockmen from the surrounding stations, including Rick in his younger days. Rick and I will leave you here at Quamby as we enjoy reminiscing about the past. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you have. Join us next time as we make our way back to Cloncurry via Fort Constantine, and then on to McKinley and Kainoona, where we camp overnight with the very friendly Brolgers, before making our way to Longreach, where we again share our camp with Brolgers. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, Living Life.